Ruck chewed on his own food before he finally nodded, if not in approval, then at least in understanding. Emily relaxed, taking her foot off Proctor's. "When you get ready to move your cattle toward Boston Market," Ruck said, "you might want to begin by contacting a man named Elihu Danvers. Danvers has a house near the mouth of the river across from Cambridge. Although he's no great sailor anymore, he moves goods around the bay." As he continued with his advice, Proctor grinned at Emily around his mouthful of chicken. Of course her father liked him. She smiled back, but with tighter lips. Beneath that smile lingered worry over his unexplained comment about magic. Eventually, Proctor would have to figure out a way to explain the magic. He wouldn't be able to keep it secret from her, not if they were going to be together. He reached under the table, wiped his fingers on his breeches, and then stretched his arm to try to touch her hand. A huge, ripping noise stopped Ruck in the middle of his description of the harbor shipping lanes. "What was that?" he said. Proctor looked over his shoulder at the torn seam in his linen jacket and said, "That is what happens when you grow more than you expected." So that's chapter 1. I guess I'll read just a little out of Baghdad at Sunrise. Sound reasonable? Okay. Anybody here in military history? No? Okay. One of our faculty members is Colonel Peter Mansour, who was in Iraq and served with General David Petraeus as his executive assistant. He wrote a book called Baghdad at Sunrise, and it talks about his experiences in Baghdad serving as a brigade commander. It's subtitled Brigade Commander's War in Iraq. So this is it. And it's one of these books that I think is really interesting, and I read it and interviewed him for Writer's Talk. And it's not a book that I think professes a particular political stance, because I recognize that there's a lot of there's a ton of dispute over this. But it's a really interesting read about just one person's experiences in Iraq and what he did and went through there. So I'll read some of it and go from there. This is from the prologue. Okay. The team of 8 soldiers waited until nightfall, then moved in position on the roof of a multi-story building overlooking the eerily quiet streets below. Their mission was to scan for enemy activity, particularly the ubiquitous mortar teams that moved around the city at night, despite persistent efforts to hunt them down. This was the heart of Adhamia. Anybody wants to correct me on my pronunciations, you're welcome to, because I probably will get them wrong. A volatile Sunni neighborhood of Baghdad, a hotbed of anti-coalition activity where cold stares greeted American soldiers and where insurgents conducted nightly attacks. On this night, tensions in the neighborhood ran high. 6 days previously, in a scene reminiscent of Somalia a decade earlier, hysterical crowds in Fallujah had dragged the burned and mutilated bodies of 4 American civilian security contractors through the streets and strung 2 of them up from a bridge after gunmen ambushed their SUVs with small arm fires and rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs. Many citizens had rejoiced along with their Sunni brethren to the west. Their elation would not last long. A half-mile or so away from the team in the square near Abu Hanifa Mosque, a large, unruly crowd of several hundred Iraqis gathered. Before hostilities had begun, Saddam Hussein had been last seen alive here. The square had been the scene of fierce fighting 10 months earlier when Ba'athist holdovers ambushed a group of American soldiers stationed in the area. On this night, the mob, its emotions whipped to a frenzied pitch, loudly protested the Marine offensive into Fallujah in response to the contractor slayings. Armed insurgents fired a number of RPGs toward the local police station. Iraqi police and American soldiers nearby returned fire and scattered the enemy. The team of soldiers established their observation post, OP, and I, when I interviewed him, told him that he has a, I'm trying to think of the word here, and it's not coming to me. In his preface, he lists all the military acronyms, and I found myself referring to it because after he tells you about observation post, OP, he just uses OP from that point on, and knows that you know it, and that's a really sort of interesting thing because you begin to understand some of the lingo, not by any means all of it, and I kept going back to the thing at the beginning to say, oh, what's that again? So anyway, The team of soldiers established their observation post and began to scan the neighborhood with night vision devices. In the fluorescent screens of light-amplifying goggles, the area appeared muted in shades of green and black. The streets around the building seemed tranquil, but the stillness was deceiving. The team could hear the sounds of explosions in the neighborhood. No one expected the calm in the immediate vicinity to last. It didn't. The American soldiers were not alone. 20 minutes after the team's arrival, rocket-propelled grenades crashed into the building and automatic weapons fire plastered the area. The soldiers dove for cover. The team leader, First Lieutenant Brady Van Engelen, fell with a severe wound to his head. A round from an AK-47 assault rifle had pierced his Kevlar helmet and fractured his skull. The team's combat lifesaver, a soldier who had been given extensive first aid training, immediately went to work to staunch the flow of blood. The team, pinned to the rooftop by intense fire and with a seriously wounded soldier in their midst, made an anxious radio call to battalion headquarters for urgent casualty evacuation and assistance. Lieutenant Colonel Bill Rabena, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Field Artillery, immediately diverted the battalion's combat observation lacing team platoon, the Colts, from another mission to extract the endangered team. With the situation unclear, 1st Lieutenant Eddie Kwan cautiously led his platoon toward the friendly occupied building. Tense soldiers kept a vigil, watch out for enemy on the rooftops and in the alleyways. Suddenly, all 4 Colt HMMWVs, high-mobility, multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, came under concentrated small arms fire and RPG fire. In the lead vehicle, Kwan pushed through the ambush, but soon encountered obstacles that the insurgents had hastily erected to bar the way. Under heavy fire, lacking positive identification of the friendly position in the building, and unable to bypass the obstacles, the Colts temporarily withdrew. Enemy fighters began moving toward the stricken observation post. As the commander of the 1st Brigade combat team of the 1st Armored Division, I listened to the increasingly tense reports flooding into my tactical operations center from 5 miles away. Even though it would take 30 minutes or more for an armored relief force to arrive on the scene, I ordered tank and infantry fighting vehicles support from neighboring battalions. The team, threatened with being overrun, didn't have 30 minutes to wait. Lieutenant Colonel Rabena directed a quick reaction force from B Battery, led by 1st Lieutenant Michael Valle, to link up with the Colt platoon and ordered Lieutenant Kwan to re-engage. The reinforcements consisted of an M109A6 Paladin self-propelled howitzer, an M113 armored field ambulance for casualty evacuation, and an M88A1 heavy armored recovery vehicle for breaching obstacles. Each armor vehicle mounted a .50 caliber heavy machine gun, but the firepower would not be enough to overwhelm the well-armed insurgents and their RPG launchers, Russian-made RPK machine guns and AK-47s. So you start to get a sense, I think, in that excerpt of the kind of stuff that he's talking about. It's a very interesting book, and I recommend if you're interested in what's going on in Iraq, Iran, and in that area of the world, that you read it and then talk to or take Professor Mansour's course. It was an education for me. And with that, I kind of have come to the end of what I had planned, and the only other thing I'm going to suggest is 2 things. One is that, as she mentioned at the beginning, I am the host, producer, occasionally editor of our Writers Talk at OSU, and we're through the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing. We broadcast on 90.5 WCBE, your Central Ohio Public Radio station, and hopefully you're donating to them because they just went through a fund drive, and they're great folks over there. And we also broadcast on Buckeye TV, or we're beginning broadcast, and I think if you're students here, you get Buckeye TV on your cable, right? Anybody? Buckeye TV? Nod your head, yes? Okay. Hopefully. So we'll be on there as well, and we're on Educable. These are all television stations, and the Ohio Channel, which is throughout the state of Ohio in various PBS stations. And if you go to theohiochannel.org, you can see our most recent interviews. We had one yesterday with a guy named John. Oh, this is so embarrassing. I spent the day with him. He's one of the Vlog Brothers. Anybody on YouTube familiar with the Vlog Brothers? Okay, John will kill me for having so quickly forgotten his last name, which is one of my particular talents. I have the ability to forget a name within about 2 seconds. But anyway, we talked to John yesterday. He was great. He does a lot of stuff with his brother, Hank, and they had this thing that the only way that they would communicate for a year was to post a vlog to each other, a video log, right, on YouTube. And so they did this for a while. They got more and more publicity. They started a fan club called the Nerd Fighters, and they fight for good. They fight for nerds. And that's what John was talking about yesterday. He also wrote the book. He's written a number of books, Looking for Alaska, which won a number of awards, including the Prince Award. And I probably should have read from that today in honor of John, whose last name I forgot, but will be forever burned into my memory by the time I go home. Anyway, so all of that stuff is on there, and it's really cool. And if you know anybody who is interested in, who is a writer, John Green, like John Green, please have them come out and talk to us. I'll do my best to remember the name, especially if they wear a name tag. I'm the inverse Gordon Gee, because apparently he remembers everybody's name, and I remembered no one's. So at any rate, come on out, look, go listen to us on Wednesdays at 8 o'clock on WCBE and WCRS. If anybody's familiar with them, we're also on that. So we're trying to become the king of all media, supplant Howard Stern. Soon we'll be swearing incessantly on what is that, satellite radio and television. Is that okay? You want me to start now? Anyway, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And, books, yeah.